Welcome to the Windy City Meeples podcast. I'm your host Shane, and with me always is Kyle.
Ahoy, everyone.
So, Kyle, I was thinking this week, what do you think about blinging out or deluxifying your games? What are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I think it's came up a lot in our just discussions outside of the podcast recently, because there's almost this level of do you want more games in your collection or maybe less games in your collection and have those be more deluxified and pretty. But I'm sure that conversation will come as we go here. But I think just in general, to start with a stance, I think I'm in favor of preferring the deluxification over the non-deluxification. I'd rather put that a little bit of extra money in to make something more immersion. What's that word I'm looking for? To give me more and more immersion. Sorry. And yeah, I know we discussed that there in an earlier podcast. To me, it's all about being sucked into the world. And if I think you have those deluxe components, it helps make you feel like you're more a part of that journey in whatever game you're playing. With one caveat, some stuff can get too big and too bulky and is more a hindrance to playing the game, even though it can look prettier. So we can discuss more about that as we talk about specific games. But what's your initial thoughts on the topic?
Me, it's definitely depends on the game. Like, if you're going to spend the money to upgrade and bling it out or deluxify it, however you want to put it, you got to basically want this game forever. Like, I mean, it can't just be. I mean, we all have them. We all have a game where you get it, you play it a dozen times or so, and then it just sits on a shelf. So this is, to me, if you're going to spend the money, it's got to be something that you're going to play for years. It may not be every week, but it's definitely going to get the use out of it that it needs. Example for me, which I recently upgraded, was the Quacks of Quedlinburg, a bag drawing game. For those of you who haven't played it, where you pull little ingredients out of a bag and put it into your pot to make your magic potion. Um, I liked the game, but the bags that it came with had corners where all your little cardboard chits got stuck, and the cardboard just didn't seem to really shuffle up as much. I just found they all clumped together in a corner, and it really didn't seem as randomized. And it was more of a pain to get them out than it was a joy. So I bit the bullet and I went to Board Game Geek's store, and they have these Geek Up sets, they call them. And I bought their Quacks of Quedlinburg, which makes every token. They're identical art, identical shape as the cardboard chits, but now they're like an acrylic plastic token. And I even went as far as buying the bags. They had upgrade bags, which are sewn in a way where there's no corners. Like it's a
Oh,
round bottom, and then they kind of come up from there with a drawstring. So there's no real sharp corner like in the square type bags that you see. And I mean, my
square
wife and I
bag.
both, yes, square bag. There you go. My wife and I have just loved it even more since doing that. I don't know. It just feels more satisfying swirling around those little plastic tokens. Like it just sounds better. It looks better on the table. I know it sounds weird, but it just made the game better. And this being a game that I know my parents play, and it's some of my wife's friends that aren't really into board games, they don't mind it. So I thought this is a game that's going to stick around. This is a game we enjoy. And I've even decided if we're going to buy the expansion, I'm going to order the Geek Up set before I even buy the
Right.
expansion, just so I got it coming. So, I mean, that's kind of my thoughts on that style. But be forewarned, like I basically doubled what that game costs to buy it that way. So I mean,
Right.
that's the downside.
Yeah, I think just hearing what you have to say there, the interesting part to me was it took a game that was kind of eh to, I'll actually enjoy to sit down and play this game.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's
Well,
definitely the pros, right, of the
Oh, for sure. An example of a game that you have that we've played that didn't need to be upgraded, but they upgraded themselves is that Deep Blue. You can see it up there on your shelf behind you with Aquaman there, but
Yeah.
just there they got the little plastic gems. I mean, they're all the same, they're just different colors, but that is like 10 times better than if it was just little cardboard circles that you threw in the bag and had to draw out. Like it's
Yes.
just so satisfying to play that with that. Like,
Yeah,
and
and
so that's sometimes where sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say Deep Blue being that game there from Small World, right? Or no, Days of Wonder. Days of
Days of
Wonder. They
Wonder, yeah.
also do Small World. It's really nice because they added those components without really increasing the price, or maybe that was part of the reason they justified the price they did charge. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But I know we've talked about too, they have the treasure chests, right, where you can put your coins in after and kind of collect, make it feel like, you know, you're building up this treasure icon. So again, those little components are just really increasing that immersion into the world you're taking about. And I know funny enough, I complained about the treasure chest at one point because I was like, let's just write our numbers down, it's faster. But I think part of that is that same thing you're talking about with the square bottom bags, where my chubby fingers are like, I can't easily count my score up necessarily.
Yeah.
But that's part of the fun, I think, in that game too, is you're like, well, I think I got a lot of points, but I'm not going to count everything in my chest right now. So maybe I'm winning, maybe I'm not. So there's that little mystery component there too.
And I definitely enjoy that with that game because, I mean, some games have you like have your tokens flipped over for your scores so no one else can tell, but you can kind of keep a look at it and keep track. Some have it behind a screen. But that one, I mean, it's hard for you to count them without everybody watching you count them. So it is kind of a mystery. You just kind of like, yeah, I got points here. I'm throwing it in my chest and I'm moving on to the next dive. I mean, and I like that where you don't like, I like the games where you don't see you're winning.
Right.
Like,
you don't know till the very end.
trackers are good and all, but to me, a game with a tracker needs to have some decent end game scoring where, yeah, I'm ahead by like 20 points or something, but what this other person has done may gain them 30 plus points at the end of the game, where I've been doing like a safer route and I'm only going to get like 5 or 6 extra points. I don't like it when you can watch the tracker and be like, I won. I know I'm going to win. I'm too far ahead for anyone to do anything, and this is the last round. So, I mean, I like that. I guess we're getting off topic here.
I was going to say, I know that's off of our main theme, but again, I mentioned in the other podcast, but that Merchants of the Dark Road, that's why I'm excited for that one, because there's those two, there's the victory track everyone sees, and then there's your own private gold collection, right? And your points is whatever's lowest, right? So one's well known, one's secret. That idea alone, again, with the artwork, is like, yeah, let's back this game. Let's give it a shot.
Yeah. So going back to blinging stuff out here and deluxifying it, I recently backed a game called Forest of Radgoss on Kickstarter. And I think it's cooperative, but it's basically a storytelling game on Slavic mythology, I believe. And it looks beautiful. But that was one where you had the decision. Do you buy it and just get cardboard standees to represent all the creatures and players that you will control or meet during this game? Or do you upgrade it and get the plastic miniatures? I ended up upgrading because the miniatures do look... I like the style. I know you had said that when you'd looked at it, it was a little bit more simplified, I guess. You weren't a huge fan of the minis, but I think it was just not... I think it's an art style. Like
that, yes, it's more aesthetics. Yeah, for sure.
And so it's an art style that I, for the most part, like. I think there's a few when was watching the Kickstarter and getting updates. They're like, well, it's going to be this or this. And I'm like, well, hopefully it's this cool looking thing. And they're like, no, it's this worm looking thing that I didn't like. But I'm not the content controller there. So it's what it is. But yeah, I went with that because, I mean, the art is beautiful, but I don't know, the miniatures on that just made it look like it would be more exciting. And as I've gotten into painting, starting to anyways, or trying to get to it, it's something else cool to do. I know you're more into the painting than I am right now, but
Yeah, but the bad thing about that is it can really build up, and you start to wonder. After doing my recent video for this channel on my campaign games with all the big plastic miniatures, I've probably bit off more than I can chew there. But I think it's an interesting conversation between like the standee versus, let's see, the miniature, right? So
yeah.
as far as table presence goes, obviously this miniature really pops and stands out for you.
Oh yeah.
Especially where my wife was able to give this one a really cool paint job. And the pros and cons, I think I would go into this discussion is this is going to look more epic on your table when you're having that big boss fight. However, stuff like this, you have two concerns. One is setup time, because if you're fighting a specific thing in a certain game, you got to go to the right box or the right baggie, grab out the right piece. And then there's also potentially that storage solution problem where do you put all this stuff? Do you put them back in the box? Do you put them out for display for people to see? Like, what exactly do you do with your miniatures? And how long does that? Because we always talk about wanting to play more games, right? And if we spend 45 minutes setting up, that's 45 minutes less you're playing the game, right?
Oh, I agree, and that is something I know you're more of a Simon uh, fan, I believe, lately. I know I was a big Blood Rage and bought Zombicide back in the day, but their miniatures are they're beautiful and they're great, but there's like too many now. It becomes that clog of setting stuff up. Like you need to have separate storage solutions to even speed it up. Like I don't know if you get like those sewing kits or whatever, those plastic kits, and have them labeled and have them in each their own little spots to try and speed it up. But like even trying to get them back in the box after you open it, next to impossible. And even if you did, like some of them have a decent eggshell. Even if you do, they're not very handy for, like you say, setting up, moving. It's like, oh, now I need this abomination for Zombicide because that's what I'm used to. You got to dig through it and like go get it and put some more eggshells back on, unless you want this just giant mess of eggshell cartons and box stuff everywhere.
And I think that's so interesting because it's almost like in those situations, less content's easier and better, but can also decrease the experience. Like, for instance, one of the games we recently got to play was Massive Darkness, just the first one, and I have the retail edition. So obviously, if I kickstarted it, I'd have like triple the miniatures.
Yeah.
And the first time we encountered a mob, there's a little bit I just had to find the right baggie because I got them bagged out in different units. But after the first time they spawned, for us it was pretty easy, at least in my mind, to okay, grab these three, put them on the board. But if we're looking at an all-in pledge where you have 30 different potential spawns, that needs almost an entire table on its own, right? So in that case, less is almost more. So
Yeah.
the big test will be when I do get Massive Darkness 2, because that was a big miniature. That was the first big miniature game I backed. And I was like, this looks so awesome. We'll see how much it ends up hitting the table because of that same thing. Maybe I do find I'm just pulling out the core box and all that extra Kickstarter stuff is just staying, on the shelf behind me.
Yeah. And I know this goes back a ways. I remember it was a housewarming party we went to. We were talking to a mutual friend of ours that you introduced him to me from Calgary, who has gotten into Gloomhaven. And I believe they were talking about 3D printing. I think they have a 3D printer, and we're going to 3D print all the monsters for Gloomhaven so that they never had to use the standees. I'm like, that's blinging out your game, but with that kind of game, I'm almost like, cool if we just dump the standees or the miniatures from our characters and put out standees for us because it's quicker. I mean, I guess that part's not as quick, but it would keep a cohesiveness to the look of the game, and they take up less storage. Like,
Yeah, and I was thinking that too, the same way, because the one standee I have here is from Gloomhaven. It's the bigger one, so it'd be easier to see here on the camera. We haven't fought the dragon yet, but yeah, and I think It's funny because if you would ask me a year ago, I would have said, let's not use standees. Let's have everything be big, bold, and awesome like this zombicide dragon, right? So, but now I'm like, it's okay. Like games don't have to have the miniatures. I'm okay with standees if we're gonna, I guess, come to a summary to my argument on the deluxification kind of stuff. That I'm definitely okay with the standees, just the speed it makes for the game. And ISS Vanguard was another one I backed, and Awaken Realms was one. They had a game called like Aetherfield, ISS
Yep.
Vanguard, sign of those games. And from a lot of other people's reviews, I'm like, they talk about how the miniatures are gorgeous and absolutely amazing, but besides your player miniature, they barely hit the board.
Yeah.
Like, like you're might be playing for a couple hours and then might be on the board for 10 minutes. So they're like, you don't really need them. So that's where I guess my thing is now when I'm looking at future games is how often is that miniature being used or those deluxification components? Because you don't really need it if it's only for one mission or for one little side area of the game, right?
Yeah. And so for me, I guess it comes down to, like I said, whether you're going to play the game for lots, like forever, kind of keep it forever in your collection, because you are going to be paying a lot more to have a premium edition copy of your game. It does come down to setup as well. Like my example with Quacks doesn't change the setup at all. You're still just popping open bags. And it doesn't take up any more room, really. I mean, technically a little more room in the box, but there was a lot of room anyways, so it doesn't require a second container or anything. But I'm kind of losing my train of thought
That's
here,
okay.
bro.
I will hop in because one game I wanted to talk about that I guess, have the deluxe components for, and just to me, how much it improves my experience. And it wasn't a huge price difference. And for that, for my experience, I wanted to talk about Oceans.
Yes.
So from the Evolution series, the Ocean game. And this is one where I believe the deluxe edition, I might be misquoting, but I think it was something like $20 more.
Yeah.
It's again, this is an old Kickstarter pledge, so I don't remember all the fine details. But in this game, if you're unfamiliar, you're basically creating your own sea creatures and you're trying to get them to survive, and get to pass on and score you points. And there's a few things that the deluxe has that for me really improves the quality of the life of the game. So what ends up happening is you have little fish food that you're trying to feed your creatures with, right? Here's the cardboard cutouts. You can see they're not really used because with the deluxe components, you get these little, oh, this is not going to show up very well, but you get these little tiny fish. Here's like a little green guy. And they're a lot more tactile, right? Gives you something more to touch, to put your fingers in. And you have your reef. And this is where you're pulling your food from. And if I just grab a couple, you have a couple little pieces of cardboard in there and you need to feed your fish like four. You're like trying to pull them out. Like my fingers can't really grab these little pieces of plastic. It kind of slows down the joy of me feeding my fish because it's like, oh, where are they? I can't get them out. It's cool that they blend in because that's, I guess, thematic, as in fish are going to try to hide so they're not eaten, but
Yeah.
but makes it a little hard. But you get those little, again, this is not going to show up here because they're going to slide, but you get those plastic fish in here and it's a lot more tactile experience to, again, pull those out and you're like, yeah, I'm feeding my fish like 3 times and we're growing, and next
Yeah.
thing I'm gonna attack you and take from you. And I really think, to me, that really adds to the experience. I don't think I'd have as much fun if it was just me trying to get my fingers stuck in on these little cardboard pieces. And it's funny
Yeah.
because you talked about the square bags not being as good as the round bags, but with Evolution and the deluxe component, you do get your little bags where you store your victory points and your food. And these ones are really cool. They have like a lot of really fun art on them. But again, it's that secret component to your score that we kind of talked about earlier. And if you get the regular edition, they give you a little like 1 inch player board that you hide your points behind. And to me, that seems like so unthematic. And it's just kind of like, okay, oh yeah, I can see Shane has 10 because I can look over his little board.
Yeah.
Where in the deluxe component, they're just little bags that you can pull tight. You put your little fish in there, and it's almost like that treasure chest moment where you feel good. You're like, I'm putting some fish into my bag. I'm doing well. Shane has no idea how many I have, and you
Yeah.
kind of get to move along, right? So in this case, and you know what? I've only played this game 3 times. I love it, but it seems like, I don't know, it's just trying to get it to the table. But I'm glad that I spent the extra money on the deluxe components, because when I do play, it makes my experience that much better. And it wasn't a huge cost difference, and it doesn't change the setup time.
Yeah, and I do remember what I was going down the path to say earlier. So I was going on to the quacks thing and how if you're going to keep it forever, but also in longevity is kind of where I was going. I upgraded my Everdale through Kickstarter to get the wooden tree, and that becomes an upgrade of necessity. I mean, yes, it's nice, it looks nice. You can play the game without the tree, but it takes away from its table presence. But if you don't upgrade to that wooden tree, at least the advice I've gotten, and I've never played with the cardboard one, so I don't know, because I just straight up bought the wooden one right off the bat, is that unless you're leaving that tree set up somewhere, like taking it up and down as the cardboard one, it just gets ragged and ripped and beat up way too fast. So it was totally recommended to me when I bought it that you, like, 'cause I went on the second Kickstarter when they put their first or second expansion out, and he says if the tree's up there, get the tree, because the tree is, I mean, it's part of the visuals of the game, and he's like the cardboard one just falls apart. I mean, it's nothing against them. It's just cardboard isn't meant to be manhandled, pulled apart, put back together, pulled apart. Like it's
Right.
so. I mean, so there's that upgrading too, where it's kind of blinging out your game, but it's almost a necessity, especially if it's a game that you're going to hold on to and enjoy playing, because you don't want the parts to wear out and then it's horrible looking, right?
Yeah, and I think that makes a good conversation point here, because maybe we differ, because you just mentioned about like the necessity. Love the blinging out factor, but I almost feel like you could totally get away with not having that tree, and I personally, anyway, would still feel just as immersed in the world.
Yeah, and that is a personal preference. I mean, I've played it without the tree, and it's fine because I mean, I think the one expansion chops down the tree.
Oh,
So it's just because it goes behind the tree. So they kind of take the tree out and you just put your stack of cards on its stump instead of in the tree trunk. But I mean, it's thematic to the world. It
yes.
really makes everything feel to size a little bit too, because you got your little meeples, squirrels or mice or whatever, and you got this giant tree beside them, right? So it actually makes them look like your small woodland critters in a forest where without the tree, your meeple is the same size as a meeple in my Raiders of the North Sea game. So my Viking meeples are the same size as my squirrel meeples. And I know that's just whatever, it's game tokens and stuff. But when that tree's there, it kind of makes the forest seem that much bigger and your creatures that much smaller. It's just a minor thing. Like you said, you can play it without, and I have, and I don't mind it without. Sometimes it's quicker to set up without, but
I do think that's a really excellent point on the making your game world to scale. Because how many board games can you name that allow you to really set up a good scale, to what's going on in the world? And honestly, on the top of my head, I can't think of anything else. I mean, I'm sure they exist, but you're right. The tree does give Everdale that scale.
yeah. And kind of another topic in this whole deluxeification and blinging out is what are your thoughts on meeples versus miniatures when it comes to getting a game now?
Again, if you would have asked me 6 months ago, I would have said I need the miniatures. Like, there's no, like, how can you replace that epicness? But I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit here, but meeples to me, I think are great. They make the storage space a little bit smaller, but I will say I think what's important to me is some uniqueness to the meeples. So Everdale has the different shapes, for the little woodland critters, and even the monsters and meeples. I think is a game we've both kind of been looking at here on Kickstarter, and they're they basically showed the upgraded Kickstarter version is going to have like little printed chubby kind of like heroes, right, of like your paladin or your wizard. And the regular game, if it does go to retail, is just going to be your basic colored meeples. And I was like, well, I don't want that. I'm okay with the meeples, but they need that uniqueness. If they're just a red cube or a yellow cube, that doesn't give me the immersion. But if they have a little face on them, or they're shaped like a little bat or a little fox, to me, I as long as the meeples have that distinct shape or they have a pattern on them, they're just as good to me as miniatures. However, if it is just a little white cube, then in that case, I'd prefer, having the miniature, right? But as long as there's that little extra work into it, at this point, I'm almost preferring the meeples. And hey, it's in our name, so we gotta love them.
Yeah, and I was going to say that meeples seem to have come a long way since the start as well. They used to all be the generic meeple that we've all seen, just kind of the blob with arms.
Yeah.
No face, no nothing. But now, yeah. But now every game seems to be throwing their own twists on them. I mean, the Garpilt games, all the North Sea trilogy ones, they have a little kind of a Viking shape to it. I mean, it's minor. It's not crazy Viking. Like, it's not like, oh, that's an awesome looking Viking, but you can tell it's just not normal meeple. I do have some kind of like monster or meeples and monsters. I don't know. I think I put it on the shelf here. Netatonka. I don't know if you can see that up there in the one corner. That has silkscreen meeples, and so it's kind of like the monster meeples and monsters, where they're little natives, but they're all silkscreen, different thing. There's a chief and different warriors. And another one I think that's up behind me is that Founders of Gloomhaven, where they've actually did kind of like Everdale. Every race of creature has their own meeple sculpt or cut. I think because I have always wanted to create and publish a board game, I think I've definitely started leaning towards meeples more, just because as I've been looking at costs and stuff and reading about costs, and it's easier for them to like do a cool shaped meeple and then just kind of like sculpt it into a dowel of wood or whatever, and then just cut them to thickness and paint them, than it is obviously to set up molds and sculpts to do really badass miniatures. Like,
yeah, I do think it's interesting looking at Kickstarter timelines. Anything with miniature based is always like 2 years, well, at least a year away, but it could be up to 2 years before you're actually getting that game.
Or 3.
Or 3. Or 4 or 5. I'm not that familiar with the game, but I know Kingdom Death, I think they're like 4 years behind on some of their stuff. But that game has its own cult following that absolutely fall in love with it, right? But yeah, those miniature games definitely take a long time. Where there's other stuff that I've backed, and it's like, oh wow, I actually got this game in the expected timeline that was only 8 months or something. And of course, you can argue, where are they in development when they're popping that stuff off? But I do believe that the speed of manufacturing is a lot lower, and like you said, that cost is lower, so it makes games a lot more accessible. Like, you look at stuff like right now, and by the time this is aired, it's going to be over, but there's the Zombie Side Undead and Alive that's I think got less than 24 hours left at this point. And if you're sitting there and you do want all that content, you do want all those hordes of plastic miniatures, the all-in pledge is like $300 American, right? Like,
yeah,
that's going to isolate a lot of the population. And that being said, I think they've made over like 2.5 million at this point. So I mean, obviously they're making money, they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I think you're cutting so many people off in that case, where Monsters and Meeples is like $50 American for this is the game. There's no secret, extra $100 to pay to get hordes of plastic. And again, the jury's out. We haven't played that game yet. I know we're both excited to give it a try, but at the same point, you're more willing to try a game. For me, if I can say, let's spend $60 to have an experience one night. If it's great, awesome. If it sucks, whatever. We can pass it along to a viewer or something like that, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm spending $300 on a game, Primal, I really hope I love this game to pieces, right? Because
Yeah.
I'll be pretty disappointed if I don't end up liking it. And you try to do your due diligence, you look at reviews, you watch gameplays, you do everything you can, and everything I watched about that was like, yeah, this is for me. But you don't really know until it hits the table. So I definitely appreciate when there's a smaller entry point into series. So again, Meeples can be a big plus for that.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about as you're talking there, the whole Simon. Simon has also kind of brought on a second market. So it's got the gamers. And I guess so a third market. It's got the gamers, it's got the gamers that love miniatures. But I know people that will buy their products just to paint it. They'll never play the game. They'll paint it, and then probably a couple years down the road, they'll just sell the whole thing because they've got 4 other games to paint, right?
Right.
And so it becomes it's their hobby of painting, and then they might recuperate their money because they're selling, especially if they're good at painting, they're selling a fully painted game that's never been played.
Yeah.
But that's just something they do. And I guess that's kind of blinging out your game too. Like we're talking about getting all these miniatures and stuff, and like I said, I tried to get into painting, and then a lot of things have gone sideways here in the house and stuff. But I started Blood Rage. I will finish it eventually. I want to paint. What is it? What's it called here? Stuffed Fables. I want to paint. My wife said she enjoyed the game and wants to paint them, or wants them painted. She's not going to paint them. But so that's a whole other side to blinging out, which is that's more of a time investment. I guess there's some money to lay out to start with to get your paints and set up and that, but after that, it really becomes more of a time sink than a money sink.
Yeah, and I do agree. And there's a little positive spin on letting that stuff hit the table afterwards. You talk about you're going to paint Stuffed Fables. The one game that I've actually managed to paint every player character for was Massive Darkness that we got to play here on the previous weekend. And to me, just seeing those pieces on the table that my wife and I have painted, to me, it's just like, wow, like I did that. It definitely makes those characters stand out a little bit more. And I could just imagine if everything was painted, how gorgeous that would be. But you're looking at, I don't know, in that case, you'd spend more time painting than you ever would playing the game. But I mean, again, they're not going to show up well, but my wife painted the little archer. I got the paladin guy painted. And to me, I think that's so much better than just your bland gray plastic. But again, the gray plastic looks good too.
Oh yeah, it definitely, especially with the details they're now getting into some of these things, like that. Was it Zombicide Dark Horde there? That dragon you showed?
Yeah.
Like just the details, like it's just, like it's just crazy the details in the sculpt and that, and even like the holes in the wing because it's zombified. Like just the attention to detail is amazing in these things. And I mean, an example actually, if you go on YouTube, most of those guys that are showing you how to paint these things, they don't play the games, I don't think. Like, I mean, maybe they do, but I mean, like, I don't think they use the versions that they painted. Like, I've watched Serestro. I can't pronounce his name, but he did a Blood Rage series, and like those are almost like display cabinet miniatures after. Like, you don't want people moving around, bumping them off bumping them off the table, dropping them by accident, because he like does the base and everything with grass and like puts in rocks and like. But I mean, like I said, that's blinging it to a whole other level. Because I mean, I guess if you got the money, you can pay them to do it for you too. So
yes. I have one more question about deluxification and blinging out for you. How important or necessary, and would you even consider it blinging out, are sleeves for you?
That's so funny because that was the thing I was going to bring up too. Because I was like, is this blinging out or is this protection of your investment? I kind of think it's both. Uh, it depends on, on that Kickstarter video you have just done about all the campaign games. I noticed as you're scrolling through some of the Kickstarters, they actually have like class sleeves and stuff for your cards, where the backs of each of the sleeves are different for the different classes in the game. So I guess you don't mix the cards up and stuff. So that to me kind of is blinging out, but it's also protecting. I would throw it in the blinging outside because I mean, I know people that draft Magic and don't ever put a sleeve on their card, which drives me nuts when I know there's something valuable in there. But
I was gonna say last time we drafted, I think that was me, but I didn't have anything valuable. But
oh no, this is at stores when we could do it in person. There's some guys that just are really good drafters, but they just don't spend the time to draft or to sleeve at the draft. And
right, yeah. So you have like your regular card. This is from Oceans.
yeah,
And then with me, with the deluxe component, like you did get the sleeves, which is really cool that they kept kind of that same artwork.
yeah,
Oh, that's the front of the card.
yeah.
And again, I enjoy, for me, especially I think because we come from Magic, anything where you need to shuffle up, I definitely prefer the sleeves. But in a game, for instance, we played Aeon's End, and that is a deck builder game, but I'm not as keen as sleeving that one because you're not shuffling. So I think you don't have to worry as much about needing to protect. Like I know it might prevent a little bit of the bending and that kind of stuff, but first of all, I think it would cost me hundreds of dollars to sleeve all that game. But to me, they're less important if I'm not having to shuffle them up. But if I have to shuffle stuff, I definitely prefer the sleeves myself.
Oh, and I agree 100% with that. Yeah, and I've gotten to the point of just buying clear sleeves now.
Mm.
Unfortunately, I've gotten a few different kinds, so I kind of have to keep some empty sleeve packs around here so I can try to match them up. If like with Everdale, getting the new expansions when they come out, probably in a year from now, I want the sleeves to match. Like I can't remember if I used matte or completely clear, but whatever it is, I want the same sleeve so that the same feel and the same look instead of having to re-sleeve everything. but but yeah, I tend to do that because the art, I enjoy seeing the art. Magic to me was one of the ones has got to have one of the ugliest backs of cards.
Hasn't changed in
games.
30, 25,
Yeah.
30 years.
I'm sure it was beautiful back then, but it is kind of drab. But I mean, it needs to stay that way. But some of these newer games that have like I have the Ashes game, I like the Phoenix art on the back. It's nothing amazing, but I like it better than having like a green sleeve on it. I like being able to just see that art. And that one also, I buy a pack of sleeves that does because that one has a second deck you use of Conjurations, which has the same kind of art, but in negative, like a black, where it's white on the normal cards. But then you have to sleeve those differently if you don't have clear sleeves, because they have to kind of be separate, right? Because your Conjurations,
yeah,
the Conjurations never go to the graveyard. They always just go back into that pile. It's basically when you summon something, you go through that deck and pull it out. So that way, I like the clear sleeves. But yeah, so I would say it is kind of blinging out. Definitely. I mean, you can go to one of our local game stores here. The guy's got a whole wall of sleeves, different colors, different arts, every shape, every size. To me, once you start going into that, compared to just clear, like Fantasy Flight throws out the clear ones, which to me are protection. But once you start going into different arts and stuff, you're blinging it out. You are taking care of your product, but you're also kind of imbue your personality on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was a guy that I don't know how well you know him, but I met him through our mutual friend who loves cats. So he has like a cat box for his decks, and he has cat sleeves for every deck he has. So that to me is him blinging it out with his personality, putting his own touch on it. So I guess that's my thought on sleeves. It's funny because that was the question I had too. what was your thought on sleeves? But yeah. So where do we land on blinging it out? I guess on my side, I'm landing on if you're going to keep it for a while, then it's a plus. If it increases your enjoyability, like the Quacks did by fixing some issues I felt with the general game, yeah, I think it's worth it. If it's something that's just going to sit on your shelf and never get played, I probably wouldn't spend the time or money on it. But what are your thoughts?
And then, yeah, I guess my final thoughts would be, as long as it's not getting in the way potentially, so if something's too big and bulky, then that's not a good thing. But yeah, just in general, I'd rather have the quality over the quantity, and I'd rather have fewer games but more deluxification. From day one with our podcast, I've just continued to say I want to be immersed, have that immersion into the game, and to me, deluxified components do that for the most part better than the standard stuff. So I'm very pro deluxe version.
Okay, man. Well, you can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. You can contact us at windycitymeeples@gmail.com. We're also on Instagram, Twitter, and have a Facebook page. We'd love to hear from you. Bye from Shane.
And bye from Kyle, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
Okay, man. Later.